At Christmas, my sister said, "We voted and cut you off." Everyone clapped. I just smiled and drop a file night explosion. Before we continue, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment about where you are watching from. Let's go back to where it all began. I should have known something was off the moment I pulled into my parents' driveway for our annual Christmas gathering. You know that feeling when the air feels charged with something unsettling? Yeah, that's exactly what hit me as I stepped out of my car. Gifts balanced precariously in my arms while Christmas lights twinkled mockingly from the eaves of my childhood home. "Emma's here!" I heard my nephew shout from inside, his excited voice a stark contrast to the reception that awaited me. Walking through that door felt like stepping into a beautiful museum exhibit of what a family Christmas should look like. The fragrant pine tree adorned with ornaments collected over decades, Mom's special tablecloth spread beneath platters of holiday treats, even the traditional eggnog in the crystal punch bowl. But museums are for looking, not touching. And that's precisely how I felt. Like an observer rather than a participant. "Oh, you finally decided to join us," my sister Rosine commented, her voice dripping with that saccharine sweetness she reserves for her most cutting remarks. She looked perfect as always. Hair styled just so, designer sweater catching the light from the fireplace. For years, she'd been the family favorite, the golden child whose every accomplishment was celebrated while mine were footnotes in family conversations. I barely had time to set my gifts down before I noticed the strange silence. Conversations had hushed, and everyone seemed suddenly fascinated by their drinks or the pattern on the carpet. My brother-in-law Cale avoided eye contact entirely, finding something terribly interesting about his phone. Only my mother kept glancing my way, her expression an uncomfortable mixture of pity and embarrassment. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light despite the knot forming in my stomach. That's when Rosine stepped forward. Champagne, flute in hand, assuming the role of family spokesperson with practiced ease. "Well, since you're here now, we might as well get this over with." She cleared her throat theatrically. "We've been talking, Emma, all of us, and we've decided that it might be best if you took a step back from family gatherings for a while." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she continued, her voice taking on that patient tone one might use with a difficult child. "We've taken a vote and it's unanimous. You're just too much, Emma. The drama, the neediness, the constant problems." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Vote? They'd taken a vote? On me? Like I was some sort of proposal to be decided on? I looked around at the faces of my family. Aunts, uncles, cousins. People I'd spent holidays with my entire life. People whose children I'd babysat. Whose hospital bills I'd helped pay. Whose late-night crisis calls I'd always answered. "Is this a joke?" I managed to ask, though I already knew from their expressions it wasn't. My mother finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Honey, we just think you need some time to get yourself together. You've been so unstable lately." Unstable. The word hung in the air like a slap. Me, the one who had bailed them all out countless times, who had put my own life on hold repeatedly to be their safety net, their problem solver, their emotional support system. I felt something shift inside. Me then, not breaking but hardening. Years of suppressed realizations crystallized in that moment as I looked around at the festive room with new eyes. The Christmas tree lights seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat as decades of family dynamics suddenly clarified with painful sharpness. "I see," I said quietly, my calm apparently not what they had expected. Rosine had clearly anticipated tears, pleas, or an outburst that would only validate their decision. Instead, I simply set down my coat and reached for my purse. "Well, since we're having such an honest family moment, I think there are some things that should be brought to light, if you'll excuse me for just a moment." I walked back to my car, heart pounding but mind strangely clear. The folder had been sitting in my glove compartment for months. Evidence I'd never intended to use. Proof I'd collected not for revenge but for my own sanity. To remind myself I wasn't crazy. Now, as snowflakes began to drift down around me, in the driveway, I knew exactly what I needed to do. When I returned to the warmth of the house, folder in hand, the uncomfortable silence had been replaced with nervous chatter. It died down again as I closed the door behind me. "You know," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "it's interesting that you've all come to this conclusion about me. Especially you, Rosine." I placed the folder on the coffee table. "Before I respect your vote, I think there are some receipts everyone should see. You know how they say revenge is a dish best served cold? Well, let me tell you, mine wasn't even about revenge. It was about truth. And it was ice cold. I didn't open the folder dramatically or anything. Didn't need to. Just slid it across the coffee table while everyone stared like I'd placed a live grenade among the Christmas cookies." Rosine's face. Oh man, if I could have framed that expression and hung it on my wall, I would have. It went from smug condescension to raw panic in about half a second flat. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, trying to maintain that authoritative tone she'd perfected over years of getting her way. But I caught the tremor in her voice. She knew. She absolutely knew. "Just some light holiday reading," I replied, keeping my voice casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Bank statements, text messages, emails, receipts. 3 years' worth, actually." My mother stepped forward, confusion etching deeper, lines into her forehead. "Emma, what is this about? We're trying to have a nice family Christmas." "Are we, though?" I interrupted, surprising even myself with my boldness. "Because it seems like we're having an intervention for the wrong person." I pulled out the first document, a bank statement showing withdrawals from our elderly aunt's account, all made by Rosine, none of which had gone toward Aunt Marge's care as promised. Then came the credit card statements showing charges for vacations, spa days, and designer clothes, all on the card I'd added Rosine to during her rough patch 3 years ago. "You said you needed help with groceries and bills," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my throat. "Funny how your essential expenses included weekends in Vegas and a Chanel handbag." Rosine's face flushed red. "You're taking things out of context. I was going to pay you back. Like you paid back the $15,000 you borrowed from Dad's retirement fund," I countered, pulling out that statement too. Our father had passed 2 years ago, and I'd been managing his estate, trying to ensure Mom had enough to live on. "The money you convinced Mom you knew nothing about?" The room had gone deadly quiet. Even the Christmas music playing softly in the background seemed to have faded away. My nephew had been quietly ushered upstairs by my aunt, leaving only adults, to witness what was quickly becoming the most honest family gathering we'd ever had. "This is ridiculous," Rosine sputtered, looking around for support. "She's obviously fabricated these." "They're real," Cale said suddenly, his voice hollow, as he peered at the statements from where he sat. "The Vegas trip. You told me that was a work conference." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "There's more," I continued, pulling out printed screenshots of texts. "Here's Rosine telling Cousin Beth I was too unstable to be invited to her wedding last summer, right after I confronted Rosine about using Mom's credit card. And here's Rosine telling Aunt Jess I was battling substance issues, when really, I was working night shifts at the hospital to pay off the debt she racked. Up in my name. My hands weren't shaking anymore. With each document I presented, I felt a weight lifting. The weight of gaslighting, of constantly questioning my own memory and sanity, because Rosine had spent years convincing everyone I was the problem. "And my personal favorite," I said, pulling out a final document. The email where Rosine told my boss I was having a mental breakdown right after I refused to co-sign on a loan for her. Cost me a promotion and nearly my job, Luckily, my boss eventually realized who the actual unreliable one was. Uncle Jim, who'd always been fairly level-headed, picked up some of the statements, examining them closely. These look legitimate, to me. My mother had sunk into an armchair, her festive sweater suddenly looking too bright against her pale face. I don't understand. Rosine, is this true? Rosine's strategy shifted instantly, a talent she'd always possessed. Tears welled in her eyes, her voice catching as she said, I've been struggling. You don't know what it's been like for me. Emma's always had everything so easy. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. Easy? You mean working 2 jobs through college while you got a free ride? Or maybe you mean me postponing grad school to help Mom after Dad's heart attack, while you were too busy with your new relationship to visit more than once a month. That's not fair, she whispered. No, it's not, I agreed. None of this has been fair. The confrontation continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes. Relatives who'd been ready to ostracize me were now examining years of family dynamics through a new lens. The perfect family narrative we'd maintained was unraveling thread by thread, and beneath it lay something ugly, but honest. Why didn't you say something sooner? My cousin asked, genuinely bewildered. I shrugged. I did. Every time I tried to point out what was happening, I was being dramatic or making everything about me. After a while, you start to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are the problem. My mother was crying now, silently, looking back and forth between her daughters like she was seeing strangers. In some ways, perhaps she was. The roles we'd played for so long, Rosine the perfect daughter, me the troublesome one, had been comfortable for everyone, including her. The truth was inconvenient, messy, painful. I think, I said finally, gathering the papers back into the folder, that if anyone should be taking a step back from family gatherings, it shouldn't be me. Rosine stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to stand here and be attacked. No one's attacking you, I said quietly. These are your words, your actions, your decisions. I'm just making them visible. The silence that followed was deafening. Christmas lights blinked merrily in the background, casting colorful shadows that seemed at odds with the scene unfolding. The perfect holiday gathering had transformed into something raw and uncomfortable, but also, strangely, more authentic than any family interaction we'd had in years. I think, Cale said, standing up and looking at his wife with new eyes, that we should go home and discuss this privately. The hurt and confusion in his expression told me everything I needed to know. Their marriage, like so much else in Rosine's carefully constructed world, was built on shaky foundations. As they prepared to leave, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a profound exhaustion, and underneath it, a tentative sense of freedom. The truth was finally out there, for everyone to see. What they chose to do with it was up to them. Emma, my mother said as the front door closed behind Rosine and Cale. I don't know what to say. I smiled sadly. That makes 2 of us, Mom. But maybe it's time we all started saying the things we should have said years ago. The Christmas gathering had been irrevocably altered. But as I looked around at the shocked, thoughtful faces of my family members, I realized that sometimes a festive betrayal might be exactly what a family needs to find its way back to something real. I'd love to tell you that after dropping my truth bomb at Christmas, everything magically resolved itself. That Rosine apologized, everyone hugged, and we all went back to eating ham and pretending everything was fine. But real life isn't a Hallmark movie, and the aftermath was more like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. The first call came just 2 hours after I'd left the gathering. It was Cale, his voice tight and unfamiliar. Is it true? He asked without preamble. About the money from her parents' account? And the other stuff? Which other stuff specifically? I asked, not unkindly. There was so much other stuff that it could fill a novel. He hesitated. The text to Jason. From last summer. Ah. So he'd looked further into the folder than I'd shown publicly. Jason was Cale's best friend from college. The texts were, well, let's just say Rosine hadn't been limiting her manipulation to financial matters. Yes, I said simply. No need to twist the knife. The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he cleared his throat. I always thought you were the one stirring up trouble. That's what she always said. I know. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Cale. Not to me, anyway. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the small Christmas tree in the corner. A pathetic little thing compared to the majestic pine at my parents' house. But it was mine, honest in its imperfection. My phone kept lighting up with notifications, but I couldn't bring myself to check them. Not yet. The next morning, I woke to an email from my attorney. Yes, I'd gotten one months ago when I first started compiling evidence. Not for revenge, but for protection. The subject line read, Removal from joint accounts and financial responsibilities. All paperwork has been filed, it read. You've been removed as co-signer on all specified accounts. Power of attorney revocation has been processed. As discussed, we've included formal notice that you will not be responsible for any future financial obligations related to family members listed in our previous correspondence. I felt my chest loosen for what seemed like the first time in years. The legal ties that had bound me to their chaos were finally severed. No more surprise debts. No more unauthorized charges. No more just this once emergencies that somehow happened monthly. My phone rang again. Mom this time. I let it go to voicemail. Then again. And again. On the fourth call, I finally picked up. Emma, she began, her voice unnaturally high. We need to talk about what happened yesterday. Things got out of hand and... Did they? I interrupted. Or did things finally get honest? Your sister is devastated. She's saying you've misunderstood everything, that you've blown things out of proportion. I have bank statements, Mom. Texts, emails, voice recordings. There's no misunderstanding possible. Another long silence. Then, Cale's moved out. He took some clothes and said he needs time to think. Rosine is beside herself. I closed my eyes, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. No matter what Rosine had done, there was no satisfaction in watching a marriage fall apart. But there was also a grim recognition that perhaps it should. Relationships built on lies rarely survive the truth. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Can't you just talk to her? Work this out between yourselves without involving everyone else? And there it was, the family reflex to sweep problems under the rug, to prioritize the appearance of harmony over actual healing. For so long, I'd gone along with it, swallowing my truth to keep the peace. I tried that approach for years, Mom. It didn't work. But family should be the people who support you, not exploit you, I said firmly. Family shouldn't vote you out because you finally stood up for yourself. By afternoon, the extended family grapevine was buzzing. Cousin Beth called to apologize for believing I hadn't wanted to attend her wedding. Uncle Jim texted asking if we could talk about some money he'd lent Rosine for my medical bills I'd never had. Aunt Jess left a rambling voicemail expressing shock and asking if I was really okay after all I'd been through. The most surreal call came from my family's longtime accountant, Martin. Emma, I've just had a very unusual conversation with your mother, he began cautiously. She's asking about removing your name from several accounts and transferring some assets. Before I proceed, I wanted to check with you directly. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Let me guess. Accounts I didn't know I was on? Assets I didn't know were partly in my name? That appears to be the case, he said slowly. There's also the matter of the loan taken out against your grandfather's property 3 years ago. Your signature is on it, but given what your mother just told me, my stomach dropped. I never signed any loan for grandfather's property. The silence on his end confirmed what I already suspected. More forgeries, more financial entanglements I'd known nothing about. I see, he finally said. In that case, I strongly recommend you come to my office tomorrow. Bring any documentation. You have. This has moved beyond family disagreement into potential fraud. After hanging up, I sat very still, watching winter darkness fall outside my window. The Christmas lights from neighboring apartments cast colorful reflections on the snow-covered street below. Beautiful, from a distance. Up close, just cold and wet. My phone pinged with a text from Cale. I found more. Call me when you can. Then, another from my youngest sister, Branwen, who'd been conspicuously quiet during the Christmas confrontation. Can I come over, please? I need to talk to you. And finally, one from Rosine herself. You've ruined everything. I hope you're happy. Now, I wasn't happy, not by a long shot. But as I looked around my small, peaceful apartment, free from the chaos that had defined my family relationships for so long, I realized I was something perhaps more valuable. I was free. The masks had fallen. The marriages built on lies were crumbling. The financial house of cards was collapsing. And while standing in the rubble wasn't comfortable, it was real. For the first time in years, everyone was seeing the same reality. Not the carefully crafted fiction Rosine had constructed, and the rest of us had, for various reasons, chosen to believe. I texted Branwen back. Doors open whenever you want to come. Then I blocked Rosine's number, poured myself a glass of wine, and began preparing documentation for tomorrow's meeting with the accountant. The journey ahead would be difficult. Untangling years of financial manipulation always is. But with each signature on each legal document, I was reclaiming pieces of myself I hadn't even realized I'd lost. Later that evening, as I sorted through papers, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? Emma? It was Cale, his voice rough. I'm calling from a hotel. I found the offshore account and the second mortgage. I don't even know who she is anymore. I'm sorry, Cale. No, he said firmly. I'm the one who's sorry, for not believing you, for all the times I sided with her without questioning. You tried to warn me years ago, and I chose not to see it. As we talked, I realized that the collapse of their marriage wasn't just about Rosine's deceptions. It was about Cale finally seeing clearly, removing the rose-colored glasses he'd worn for years. It was painful, yes, but also necessary. Sometimes things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt into something healthier. By the time I went to bed that night, my email inbox contained 3 consultation requests from different law firms Cale had contacted, 2 voice messages from extended family members expressing support, and 1 unexpected email from my mother that simply read, I think I need to look at the house finances. Can you help me? It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of how she'd failed to protect me while enabling Rosine. But it was a start. A small crack in the denial that had characterized our family dynamics for as long as I could. Remember, as I drifted off to sleep, I thought about how quickly seemingly solid structures can collapse when their foundations are revealed to be rotten. Marriages, family relationships, financial arrangements. The facades we maintain to avoid facing uncomfortable truths. Sometimes a single folder of receipts is all it takes to change everything. The morning after Christmas dawned brutally cold, the kind of winter day where the air itself seems brittle enough to snap. Fitting weather, I thought, for the aftermath of what had happened. I'd left my parents' house late last night after the confrontation, declining offers to stay, needing space that wasn't charged with decades of family history. Walking to my car, through the silent snowfall, I'd felt my mother's eyes watching from the window, her silhouette backlit by the Christmas tree. She hadn't tried to stop me. Perhaps that was answer enough about where things stood. Now, sipping coffee by my apartment window, I watched the city wake up, streets still quiet from the holiday. My phone had been on silent since I'd left, and when I finally checked it, the screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. Missed calls from Mom, 12, voicemails, 8, text messages, 34, emails, 7. I scrolled through them slowly, watching the progression from anger to bargaining to guilt. Mom, 11:42 p.m. Please call me, we need to talk about this. Mom, 12:17 a.m. Your sister is devastated. How could you do this on Christmas? Mom, 1:03 a.m. Everyone is very upset. You've always been so dramatic. Rosine's messages were more direct. Congratulations on ruining another family gathering. I hope you're happy with yourself. Kale isn't speaking to me. You've always been jealous of me. This proves it. By morning, the tone had shifted. Mom, 7:15 a.m. Your father would be so disappointed. Mom, 8:32 a.m. I'm worried about you. Please call back. Aunt Marge, 9:01 a.m. Your mother is beside herself. Be the bigger person, dear. The classic pattern. No acknowledgement of what had actually happened. No apology. Just pressure to maintain the family system, however dysfunctional it might be. The emotional manipulation was so familiar it almost made me laugh. Almost. What surprised me were the messages from unexpected corners. Cousin David. Just saw the bank statements. Holy shit, Emma. I had no idea. I'm sorry. Uncle Jim. We should talk. Been suspecting something wasn't right for a while. My childhood friend Trisha. Your sister just called me with some wild story about you having a breakdown. Called BS immediately. You okay? I set the phone down without responding to any of them. The snow continued to fall outside, each flake adding to the insulating blanket that seemed to separate me from the chaos I'd left behind. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful, exhausted. Yes, sad, certainly. But there was clarity in the cold break I'd made, a clean cut from patterns that had been slowly suffocating me. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I tensed, half expecting to find my mother or Rosine, armed with tears and guilt. Instead, through the peephole, I saw a delivery person holding flowers. The card read, Emma, I've been complicit in how you've been treated. No excuses. I'm deeply sorry. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here. Kale. I placed the arrangement on my kitchen counter, a splash of life and color against the winter gray outside. Not an olive branch I'd expected, but perhaps the first honest interaction that had come from the previous night's revelations. Over the next few days, the messages continued. Some family members chose sides immediately. Predictably, many rallied around Rosine, who had always been skilled at portraying herself as the victim. Others reached out tentatively, testing the waters, trying to figure out where I stood in the new family landscape. My mother's attempts at contact became increasingly desperate. Please, just talk to me. We're still family. Everyone makes mistakes. We need to forgive. You're punishing all of us by staying away. I responded only once, with a simple text. I need space and time. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Her reply came instantly. That's very selfish, Emma. And there it was, the fundamental issue laid bare. Setting a boundary, asking for space to process years of manipulation and gaslighting, was considered selfish. The expectation was that I should immediately forgive forget, and resume my role as the family scapegoat, the one who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction without complaint. Not this time. A week after Christmas, the certified letter arrived from Rosine. I knew what it was before opening it. A demand to return the private family documents I'd shown, thinly veiled threats about defamation, declarations that I'd misinterpreted everything. Classic Darvo: deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. I passed it directly to my attorney, who responded with a crisp letter citing the evidence of financial fraud and identity theft, suggesting that perhaps pursuing this matter further wasn't in Rosine's best interest. The silence that followed was blissful. January arrived with fresh snow, and with it, a strange new reality. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't fielding daily family crises, wasn't funneling my paycheck toward someone else's emergencies, wasn't expending emotional energy managing other people's feelings about me. The space this created was both liberating and disorienting. I found myself with time, actual time, to rediscover who I was outside the role I'd been assigned in my family. I took a pottery class I'd been putting off for years, started therapy, reconnected with friends who'd drifted away during my years of family firefighting. The calls and texts gradually tapered off, though occasionally they'd surge after what I imagined were family gatherings where my absence was discussed. The scripts were always the same. Life is short, Emma. Family is all we have in the end. Your sister isn't perfect, but neither are you. Can't we just move forward and put this behind us? Moving forward was exactly what I was doing, just not in the direction they wanted. Moving forward meant acknowledging the reality of what had happened, not plastering over it with platitudes about forgiveness. Moving forward meant protecting myself from further exploitation. Moving forward meant recognizing that sometimes the healthiest family relationship is one with firm boundaries and limited contact. Winter deepened, days gradually lengthening as January turned to February. One especially cold morning, I found myself making coffee when my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "It's Branwen. Got a new phone. Can we talk?" My youngest sister. The quiet one who'd watched everything unfold at Christmas without taking sides. I hesitated before responding. "Coffee shop on Elm Street? Tomorrow at 10? Her reply was immediate. "I'll be there." As I watched snowflakes swirl outside my window, I felt neither triumph nor regret about the path I'd chosen. The clean cut I'd made wasn't about punishing my family or making some dramatic statement. It was simply about creating enough space to breathe, to heal, to rediscover myself beneath years of conditioning. The cold break had been necessary, harsh perhaps, but clarifying. Like the winter landscape outside, there was beauty in its starkness, in the way it stripped everything down to essentials. Spring would come eventually. What grew in the newly cleared ground remained to be seen. You know those movies where they do flashbacks, and everything gets all sepia-toned and wavy at the edges? That's how my memories started coming back to me once I'd created some distance between myself and my family's chaos. Little snippets of the past that suddenly made sense in a new context. Flash. I'm 18, holding an acceptance letter to my dream college, and Mom is saying, "But how will we manage without you? Rosine needs help with her apartment deposit, and your father's hours got cut again." Flash. I'm 23, canceling a trip with friends because Aunt Marge fell. Later found out she was fine. And only you know how to talk to the doctors, Emma. Flash. I'm 27, taking out a loan to cover Rosine's rent after she lost her job. Or so she claimed. Turns out she'd actually taken an unpaid leave to go on vacation with friends. Because family sticks together. Flash. I'm 30, postponing grad school applications for the third time because Mom is having anxiety about Dad's health. And you're so good at talking to the specialists, Emma. I'd been the family backbone for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright for myself alone. always the reliable one, the fixer, the emotional support animal for an entire dysfunctional system. In therapy, which I'd finally started after the Christmas confrontation, my counselor had asked a simple question that knocked the wind out of me. When was the last time someone in your family supported you during a crisis? I couldn't answer. Not because it had been so long, but because it had never happened. Not once. Not when I'd been hospitalized with pneumonia 3 years ago. Rosine had called to ask if I could still transfer money for her car payment from my hospital bed. Not when I'd been laid off during company downsizing. Mom had somehow made that conversation about how stressed she was about my employment situation. Not when my longtime boyfriend and I had broken up. The family consensus had been that I was too picky anyway. The realization had sent me spiraling into my photo albums and old emails, searching for evidence that I was wrong, that surely there must have been times when they'd been there for me. But the evidence told a different story. Photos of family gatherings where I was always slightly apart, often because I was the one taking care of something, serving food, helping an elderly relative, mediating an argument. Email threads where my own news or struggles were acknowledged briefly before the conversation pivoted back to someone else's drama. Birthday cards with hastily scrawled signatures but no personal messages. One particularly revealing discovery was an old group text from when I'd torn my ACL 3 years ago. I'd needed surgery and asked if anyone could help drive me home afterward or check in during the first couple of days of recovery. Mom: "Oh, honey, that's terrible timing. We're supposed to help Rosine move that weekend." Rosine: "Can't you ask a friend? I really need Mom and Dad's help with the move." Dad: "Maybe reschedule the surgery. Family comes first, Emma." I'd ended up taking an Uber home from surgery and managing on my own, while they'd all spent the weekend helping Rosine move into her new condo, a move that, I later discovered, had only been necessary because she'd been evicted from her previous apartment for non-payment, despite the rent money I'd been sending her monthly. These memories didn't make me angry anymore. They just made me sad. Sad for the younger version of myself, who'd tried so hard to earn love that should have been freely given. Sad for the years I'd spent believing that my value to my family was directly proportional to what I could provide for them. My therapist called it emotional labor exploitation, being valued only for the emotional and practical support I could provide, never for simply being me. It was a pattern so deeply entrenched that breaking it felt like detoxing from a powerful drug. I had withdrawal symptoms, guilt, doubt, moments of weakness where I'd pick up the phone when Mom called, only to find myself instantly pulled back into their vortex of needs. "You've always been so strong, Emma," she'd say, a prelude to some new request. "Not like the rest of us." My strength had been weaponized against me, used as justification for piling more and more onto my shoulders. After all, I could handle it. I was the strong one, the capable one, the one who never broke. Except I had broken, finally, at that Christmas gathering. And in breaking, I'd found a new kind of strength. The strength to say no, to set boundaries, to recognize that carrying my family's emotional and financial burdens wasn't an obligation but a choice I no longer had to make. The most painful realization came when I found an old birthday card from my father, written the year before he died. Inside, beneath the generic printed message, he'd added, "You're the only one I can count on. Emma, don't know what this family would do without you holding us all together." At the time, I'd treasured those words. Now, with new clarity, I saw them for what they were. Not just praise, but a burden, an expectation, a role I'd been assigned without consent and been punished for eventually rejecting. My phone rang. Less frequently these days. The family had begun to adapt to my absence, finding new ways to manage their crises, or perhaps, though I didn't hold my breath, developing healthier patterns altogether. I wasn't their backbone anymore. I was just me, Emma, a woman discovering who she was outside the role of perpetual support system. The transition from family backbone to boundaried survivor wasn't easy. There were days when the old programming kicked in hard, when I'd feel overwhelming guilt for not responding to a family emergency, when I'd lie awake wondering if I was, in fact, the selfish, uncaring person they now claimed I was. But then I'd remember the folder of receipts, the years of manipulation, the one-way street our relationship had always been. And I'd remind myself that boundaries weren't selfish. They were necessary for survival. In my apartment, I created a wall of small victories, post-it notes recording moments of growth and independence. Said no to Mom's request for money, world didn't end. Missed family Easter gathering, spent day at art museum instead. Went entire phone call with cousin without apologizing once. Small steps, baby steps, but steps away from the person I'd been programmed to be, and toward someone new, someone with worth beyond what she could provide to others. The most surprising ally in this journey was my phone's block feature, not as a permanent solution, but as a temporary oxygen mask when the bombardment of guilt and manipulation became too much. I'd block certain numbers for a weekend, giving myself space to breathe, to remember who I was becoming, before cautiously opening those channels of communication again. "You've changed," my mother said during one of our now rare phone conversations, her voice heavy with accusation. "Yes," I replied simply. "I have." The silence that followed contained volumes. Her disappointment in losing her reliable support, beam. My quiet pride in finally becoming more than that. From family backbone to boundaried survivor. It wasn't the transformation I'd ever expected or sought. But standing upright, carrying only my own weight for the first time in decades, I found I could breathe more deeply than I ever had before. I should have seen it coming. Actually, part of me did. The same part that had compiled that folder of evidence as a shield rather than a sword. When you've spent your life watching someone operate through manipulation, you develop a sixth sense for their next moves. Still, when Rosine's smear campaign began in earnest, the scope and viciousness of it caught even cynical me off guard. It started subtly. Friends I hadn't heard from in months suddenly reaching out with concerned messages. "Hey, just checking in. Heard you're going through a tough time. Your sister called me. She's really worried about you. Is everything okay? Rosine mentioned, you've been having some issues." At first, I thought it was just standard family damage control. Rosine trying to shore up her version of events before mine could spread. But then my boss called me into her office one Tuesday morning, her expression uncomfortably serious. "Emma, I received a rather disturbing email about you," she began, turning her computer screen so I could see. "It came from your sister." The email was masterfully crafted, just concerned enough to seem legitimate, just vague enough to plant seeds of doubt without making specific allegations that could be disproven. References to my increasingly erratic behavior, my family history of mental health struggles, entirely fabricated, and subtle hints that stress might be affecting my job performance. She even suggested we might want to review your access to company financial systems, my boss added, watching my face carefully. As a precaution. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just personal anymore. Rosine was going after my professional reputation, my livelihood. Thankfully, my boss had known me for 7 years and wasn't buying it. "I assumed this was complicated family stuff," she said delicately. "But I wanted you to be aware." I left her office in a daze, phone already buzzing with another text from a distant acquaintance. "Your sister reached out to me. Is it true about the embezzlement investigation?" Embezzlement investigation. She really was pulling out all the stops. By Friday, I'd heard from 15 different people who'd received calls, texts, or emails from Rosine, each message tailored to the recipient, but all painting the same picture. Emma is unstable, unreliable, possibly dangerous. Emma is having a breakdown. Emma has always been jealous of Rosine. Emma might be stealing money. The most painful call came from Mrs. Winters, my beloved high school English teacher, who'd remained a mentor over the years. "Emma, dear," she said, her voice hesitant, "I received the strangest email from someone, claiming to be your sister. Said some very concerning things. I didn't believe a word of it, of course, but I thought you should know." I thanked her, hands shaking as I hung up. The circle was widening. Rosine was going after people from every chapter of my life, trying to isolate me completely. That night, I called my attorney. I'd been reluctant to escalate things legally, still holding on to some misguided hope that my family might eventually come around. But this crossed a line I couldn't ignore. "Forward me everything you've received," she instructed, "and ask anyone willing to share what Rosine sent them to do the same. We'll send a cease and desist immediately." The legal letter went out Monday morning, formal, unambiguous, and with just enough reference to the evidence I had compiled to make it clear this wasn't a bluff. Defamation, harassment, potential interference with business relationships. The letter laid it all out in stark legal language. "She'll probably ignore it," my attorney warned. "These types usually do at first, but it creates a paper trail if we need to take further action." To my surprise, the letter had an immediate effect. The flood of concerned messages stopped abruptly. My phone, which had been buzzing constantly with people just checking in, fell eerily silent. Then came the backlash. "How dare you send lawyers after your own sister?" my mother texted in all caps. "She is devastated." Cousin Beth. "Lawyers? Seriously, Emma? This is family." Uncle Jim. "Your father would be ashamed. We don't air family business to outsiders." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded each message to my attorney, building our documentation in case things escalated further. 3 days of tense silence followed. Then, on Thursday afternoon, a different kind of text arrived. This one from an unknown number. "Emma, it's Kale. Got a new phone. She doesn't know I'm contacting you. I found something you should see. Can we meet?" We arranged to meet at a coffee shop 2 towns over, where the chances of being seen by mutual acquaintances were slim. Kale looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled as if he'd been sleeping in them. "I moved out last week," he explained, sliding a USB drive across the table. "Found these when I was going through our home computer, looking for financial documents. She's been methodical." The drive contained dozens of documents, draft emails, lists of people to contact, even scripted talking points tailored to different individuals in my life. There were notes about my workplace, my friends, even my therapist's office. Rosine had been planning this smear campaign for months, possibly even before the Christmas confrontation. Most disturbing was a folder labeled contingencies, detailed plans for what to do if I pushed back legally, if certain family members sided with me, if her initial attempts to discredit me failed. It was like reading the playbook of a psychological warfare expert. "I had no idea," Kale said quietly, staring into his untouched coffee. "All these years, I thought you were the difficult one, the dramatic one. That's what she always told me, and I never questioned it." I felt a surprising lack of anger toward him. He'd been manipulated too, in his own way. "What made you start looking?" I asked. He laughed humorlessly. "After your Christmas reveal, I started noticing patterns I'd been blind to. The way she'd twist conversations, rewrite history, small inconsistencies in her stories. Once I started seeing it, I couldn't stop. I copied the files and returned the drive to him. Be careful, Kale. She's not going to take your defection well." "Too late," he said grimly. "The locks were changed. Yesterday. My mail is being returned to sender. According to my brother, she's telling people I had a midlife crisis and abandoned her." On the drive home, I thought about patterns, how they perpetuate until something forces a break. Rosine had always operated this way, isolating her targets, controlling the narrative, ensuring she emerged as the victim regardless of her actions. I'd been cast in the role of villain for so long that it had seemed fixed, immutable. But patterns can be broken. Narratives can be challenged. And sometimes, the most powerful retaliation against a smear campaign isn't fighting fire with fire, but simply standing firmly in your truth. The cease and desist letter had created a temporary pause, but I knew Rosine would adapt, find new angles of attack. The files Cale had shared confirmed it. She was nothing if not persistent in her manipulation. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, typing steadily. Not social media posts or defensive emails. I had no interest in playing her game, but detailed accounts of everything that had happened, backed by evidence, dates, names. Not for public consumption, but for myself, for the record, for the truth. As winter deepened outside my window, I felt a strange, calm resolve settling over me. The smear campaign had been painful, yes. The family backlash, hurtful. But with each attempt to drag me back into the old dynamics, my determination to remain outside them only strengthened. Legal retaliation wasn't about revenge. It was about establishing boundaries with consequences, about making it clear that the rules had changed, that the Emma who would silently absorb blame, who would apologize for defending herself, who would prioritize family peace over personal truth, no longer existed. In her place stood someone new, someone still finding her footing in this unfamiliar territory of self-advocacy, but standing nonetheless. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney. Any new contact from R or family members? Nothing direct since the C&D, I replied. But the underground campaign continues. I have new evidence. Forward everything, she wrote back. We'll amend our filing. And Emma, you're doing the right thing. Don't let them convince you otherwise. I set down my phone and continued typing my account. Outside, snow began to fall, again, each flake adding to the insulating blanket between my new life and the old. The legal process would be long, possibly messy. The family fallout, ongoing. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting to change their perception of me or to earn their approval. I was simply fighting for my right to be free from their manipulation. And that, I realized, was a battle worth waging. I'd been staring at the same email for 20 minutes, cursor hovering over the send button, when my doorbell rang. It was nearly 9 p.m, not a time for casual drop-ins, especially given the frigid February temperatures. Cautiously, I checked the peephole. Branwen. My youngest sister stood in the hallway, hugging herself against the cold, a small overnight bag at her feet. When I opened the door, the look on her face stopped any questions I might have had. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Without a word, I stepped aside to let her in. I'm sorry to just show up, she said, her voice hoarse. I didn't know where else to go. Branwen had always been the quiet one in our family, the peacekeeper, the one who faded into the background during conflicts. At family gatherings, while Rosine commanded attention and I pushed back against her manipulations, Branwen would silently clear plates or refill drinks, making herself useful but never central. I realized, with a pang of regret, that I'd sometimes lumped her in with the others, seeing her silence as tacit support for Rosine's behavior. I led her to my couch, made tea, waited. Whatever had brought her to my door at this hour, in this weather, couldn't be rushed. They've gone completely insane, she finally said, wrapping her hands around the mug as if to absorb its warmth. Mom and Rosine, it's like they're in some alternate reality where you're the villain and they're innocent victims of your cruelty. I nodded. I'd seen this pattern before. The family closing ranks, rewriting history to preserve their self-image. The thing is, Branwen continued, her voice strengthening, I always knew Rosine was difficult, manipulative even. But I thought I was immune somehow. The quiet one, you know. Not worth her trouble. But you weren't, I guessed. She laughed, bitterly. Turns out I was just a different kind of useful to her. The reliable witness. The one who would nod along with her version of events because challenging her was unthinkable. Branwen set down her tea, reached for her bag, and pulled out a journal. Worn leather, the pages visibly thick with use. I've kept this since high school, she said, running her fingers over the cover. Wrote down everything, conversations, incidents, feelings. I wasn't brave enough to speak up, but I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening either. So I documented it all. She handed it. To me, this record of our shared history seen through different eyes. I want you to have this. Use it however you need to. It's my testimony, I guess. I took the journal, the weight of it, both physical and symbolic, momentarily overwhelming. What changed? I asked. Why now? Branwen's eyes filled with tears. They're doing to me what they did to you. Now that you're gone, their convenient scapegoat, their ATM, their emotional dumping ground, they needed a replacement. And apparently, I was next in line. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing a series of small bruises on her forearm. Mom grabbed me when I questioned Rosine's story about you. Said I was betraying the family by even asking for your side. It wasn't hard enough to really hurt, but she swallowed. It was enough to wake me up. Anger flared, not for myself this time, but for this younger sister I'd sometimes neglected in my own struggles with our family's dysfunction. You can stay here as long as you need, I said firmly. There's plenty of room. Relief washed over her face. I wasn't sure you'd even speak to me after I said nothing at Christmas. After I let them vote you out without objecting. You were surviving the only way you knew how, I said, surprising myself with the understanding I felt. We all were. That night, as Branwen slept in my spare room, I sat up reading her journal. Years of observations, carefully recorded in her neat handwriting. Rosine gaslighting me about conversations that had definitely happened. Mom subtly encouraging competition between us sisters. Dad's drinking getting worse whenever financial pressures mounted. Financial pressures often created by Rosine's spending. But what struck me most were Branwen's notes about herself. How she'd made herself small, invisible, perfect, hoping to fly under the radar of family chaos. How she'd watched me fight battles that should never have been mine alone, and felt both grateful and guilty that I was taking the brunt of it. The next morning, she joined me at the kitchen table, looking more rested but still wary, as if expecting me to change my mind about helping her. Have you checked your phone? I asked gently. She nodded grimly. 27 texts from Mom, 14 from Rosine. 3 from Aunt Jess asking if I'm with you and warning that you're not well. The smear campaign shifts to include you, I noted. Right on schedule. Does it ever stop? She asked, a note of desperation in her voice. I considered sugarcoating, it offering false comfort, but she deserved the truth. Not completely. Not yet, anyway. But it gets manageable. You learn to recognize the patterns, set boundaries, build a life that's yours, not theirs. Over the next few weeks, Branwen became not just my house guest, but my unexpected ally. She accompanied me to meetings with the attorney, adding her own documentation to mine. She took calls from family members I'd blocked, reporting back their latest tactics and accusations. She even reached out to extended family with her own carefully worded account of events, creating cracks in the united front Rosine had cultivated. Most surprisingly, her presence acted as a catalyst for others in the family circle who'd been silently questioning the official narrative. Cousin David, who'd been on the fence, called to say he believed us and had cut contact with Rosine after discovering she'd used his credit card information without permission. Aunt Marge's caretaker sent an email detailing financial discrepancies she'd noticed and been told to ignore. Uncle Jim, after a long conversation with Branwen, admitted he'd suspected something wasn't right for years, but had been afraid to rock the boat. "It's like a dam breaking," Branwen observed one evening as we sorted through the latest messages of support. All this truth that was held back for so long, suddenly flowing free. Not everyone came around, of course. Mom remained firmly in Rosine's corner, sending increasingly desperate and angry messages to both of us now. Several cousins maintained their distance, unwilling to choose sides or risk Rosine's wrath. Aunt Jess, always close to my mother, became one of Rosine's most vocal defenders, calling us ungrateful and delusional in family group texts. But for every person who doubled down on the old narrative, someone else seemed to step forward, with their own story of manipulation at Rosine's hands, their own regret at having enabled the dysfunction for so long. "I never thought I'd be brave enough to do this," Branwen confessed one night as we sat reviewing the latest cease and desist letter our attorney had prepared. This one addressing the new wave of rumors being spread about both of us. Stand up to them. Walk away. Choose truth over whatever it is we had. It wasn't bravery for me, I admitted. Not at first. It was survival. I'd reached a point where staying in that system was destroying me. She nodded. I think that's what bravery often is, though. Choosing survival when every instinct programmed into you says to keep sacrificing yourself for others. As winter began to soften into early spring, the unexpected support continued to grow. Small gestures, often, a former family friend dropping off dinner with a note saying she believed us. A second cousin sending copies of concerning emails Rosine had sent him about us. My boss implementing new email filters after another attempt by Rosine to contact my workplace. The most surprising support came from Cale, who'd moved to a small apartment across town and filed for divorce. He'd begun therapy, he told us during one of his now regular visits, trying to understand how he'd been complicit in Rosine's behavior for so long. I was her audience, he explained. Her validator, her backup. If I'd just asked questions sooner. You can't blame yourself, Branwen said quietly. She's had a lifetime to perfect these tactics. One rainy March evening, as the three of us sat in my living room sharing pizza and comparing notes on our ongoing legal strategies, I was struck by the strangeness of our new alliance. The betrayed husband, the silent sister, the family scapegoat. Now, united in our determination to break free from patterns that had shaped us all. You know what's ironic? I said, setting down my glass. Rosine's always been terrified of losing her power, her control. But by pushing too far, she's created exactly what she feared most. A coalition of people who see through her, who compare notes, who support each other in resisting her manipulation. Cale nodded thoughtfully. The harder she fought to maintain her narrative, the more cracks appeared in it. And the more people she tried to turn against you, Branwen added, the more came forward to stand with you. Support from unexpected quarters. Not a flood, not a universal validation, but enough. Enough to remind me that truth, while sometimes slower than manipulation, has its own gravity, its own power. Enough to reaffirm that boundaries once set could be maintained. Enough to begin. Healing not just from the recent wounds of betrayal and smear campaigns, but from the deeper injuries of a lifetime spent in a system designed to keep some members small so others could feel big. As I looked around at this makeshift family we were building, bound not by blood but by shared experience and mutual respect, I realized that sometimes support comes not from where you've been conditioned to expect it, but from those who, like you, have found the courage to step into their own truth, whatever the cost. The letter arrived on an unusually warm April morning, thick cream envelope with my mother's unmistakable handwriting. No return address, though I knew exactly where it had come from. I stood in my apartment hallway, mail in hand, sunlight streaming through the window at the end of the corridor, creating a pool of gold at my feet. For a moment, I just stared at it, feeling the weight of potential reconciliation or further manipulation in my hands. 3 months had passed since the Christmas confrontation. 2 since Branwen had shown up at my door. The legal proceedings were ongoing but quiet. Rosine had finally realized that continuing her public campaign against us only strengthened our case. I carried the letter to my kitchen table, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, I made coffee, tidied up, responded to work emails, ordinary tasks that felt like armor against whatever the envelope contained. When Branwen emerged from her room, no longer the spare room but hers now, decorated with plants and art prints she'd chosen, she spotted the letter immediately. "You haven't opened it," she observed, pouring herself coffee. "Not yet." She sat across from me, her expression concerned but not judgmental. "Are you going to?" I considered the question seriously. There had been a time when ignoring communication from my mother would have been unthinkable. The guilt alone would have been crushing. Now I recognized it as a genuine choice. I could discard the letter unopened. I could read it and choose not to respond. I could set it aside for another day when I felt stronger. "I think I need to," I finally said. "Not because I owe her a response, but because I want to know where I stand." Branwen nodded. "Want me to stay?" "Please." I opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the pages inside. 4 pages, densely written. I began to read aloud, Branwen bearing witness to whatever came next. It started predictably enough, expressions of hurt, reminders of all she'd sacrificed for us, references to family loyalty, then shifted to accusations. How I'd poisoned Branwen against them, how I'd manipulated Cale into betraying Rosine, how I'd destroyed the family with my delusions and selfishness. By page 3, the tone had changed again, now bargaining, offering conditional forgiveness if I would just admit I'd been wrong, if I would drop the legal proceedings, if I would come back to the family and stop this madness. She proposed a family meeting, mediated by our pastor, who I knew had always been firmly in Rosine's corner, to heal these rifts before it's too late. The final paragraph was pure emotional manipulation. "Your father would be heartbroken to see what you've done to us. Is this really the legacy you want to leave? Think carefully, Emma. Family is forever, and someday you'll regret throwing us away when you're all alone with no one to care for you." I finished reading and gently set the pages down, feeling strangely calm. Branwen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" she asked. I considered the question, taking inventory of my emotions. There was sadness, yes. Grief for the mother-daughter relationship I'd never truly had and now likely never would. But there was also something unexpected. Relief. Relief that the letter contained exactly what I'd anticipated, no new tactics or surprises. Relief that the words could no longer reach the wounded places inside me they'd been designed to target. "I'm okay," I said, realizing it was true. "It's just more of the same. No acknowledgement, no accountability, just pressure to return to my assigned role." Branwen nodded grimly. "What will you do?" I looked at the letter again, then around my apartment, the space I'd created that was entirely mine, free from chaos and manipulation. Through the window, I could see the small balcony where I'd recently placed pots of herbs and flowers. Tiny, green shoots reaching toward sunlight. New growth. New life. I think," I said slowly, "I'm going to burn it." That evening we held a small ceremony on the balcony. Cale joined us, bringing a bottle of wine and a metal bucket. One by one, we placed items into the bucket. My mother's letter, printouts of particularly hurtful texts, a family photo that had always made me wince, Rosine center stage, me half hidden behind others. Branwen added pages from her journal that she'd copied for documentation but no longer needed to carry with her. Cale contributed the wedding photo he'd kept in his wallet until recently, Using long matches meant for lighting grills, we set the contents ablaze, watching as flames consumed the physical remnants of manipulation and pain. It wasn't about denying what had happened or pretending we weren't still affected. It was about releasing the hold these artifacts had on us, transforming them from active wounds to acknowledged history. To boundaries. Cale proposed a toast, raising his glass. To truth, Branwen added. To peace, I concluded, watching the last of the paper curl and blacken in the bucket. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and sat on my balcony watching the sunrise paint the sky in delicate pinks and golds. My phone lay on the table, beside me, and I picked it up, scrolling to my contact list. For years, my in case of emergency contact had been my mother, not from any belief that she would actually help in a crisis, but from a sense of obligation, of maintaining appearances. I changed it now, typing in my own name and number. If an emergency arose, I would handle it. I was my own safety net now. It was a small gesture, practical and symbolic at once. Another boundary set. Another step toward complete autonomy. Later, that week, I received a call from my niece's school. I was still listed as her secondary emergency contact. She'd fallen during recess, nothing serious, but they couldn't reach Rosine. Would I be able to pick her up? 3 months ago, I would have dropped everything, regardless of the cost to myself, rushing to prove my worth through self-sacrifice. Today, I checked my calendar, rescheduled one meeting, and drove calmly to the school. My niece's face lit up when she saw me enter the office. "Aunt Emma, you came!" "Of course I did, sweetie," I said, signing the necessary forms. "How's your knee?" As we walked to my car, her small hand in mine, I realized something profound had shifted. I was helping not from fear or obligation, or to earn approval, but because I genuinely wanted to. Because I loved this child. Because I could choose to be there for her without depleting myself. The walk from her school to my car was lined with flowering trees, their blossoms creating a canopy of soft white and pink above us. My niece chattered about her day, her friends, the book she was reading, while I listened, truly listened, not half distracted by anxiety or resentment. When we reached the car, she looked up at me with those clear, unguarded eyes that only children have. "Mom says you're mad at our family," she said. "Are you mad at me too?" I knelt down to her level, heart aching at how adult conflicts inevitably spill onto innocent bystanders. "I'm not mad at you, not one bit," I assured her. "Grown-ups sometimes have complicated disagreements, but that has nothing to do with how much I love you." She considered this, head tilted. "Can I still see you sometimes?" "I would like that very much," I said carefully. "I'll need to talk to your mom about it, but you can always call me if you want to chat or need anything. That won't change." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, and climbed into the car. As I drove her home, to the house where Rosine now lived alone since Cale had moved out, I felt a curious sense of completion. The cycle had been broken, the patterns disrupted. Whatever came next would be built on new foundations, not the crumbling ones of the past. Rosine was waiting at the door when we arrived, her expression shifting from concern for her daughter to cold hostility when she saw me. But even this couldn't pierce the sense of peace I'd cultivated. "She's fine," I said, handing over my niece's backpack. "Just a scraped knee. The school couldn't reach you." "I was in a meeting," Rosine replied stiffly. "Thank you for picking her up." 3 simple words. Thank you. Perhaps the first genuine gratitude she'd expressed to me in years. Not effusive, not warming, but an acknowledgement of my help without immediate demands for more. "You're welcome," I said, bending to hug my niece goodbye. "Remember what I said, okay? You can call anytime." As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of them in my rearview mirror, Rosine already on her phone, my niece waving until I turned the corner. The sight didn't fill me with anger or resentment as it once might have. Instead, I felt a quiet hope. Not that Rosine would fundamentally change, or that our family would magically heal, but that perhaps, with enough distance and boundaries, we could all find our way to something resembling peace. Back in my apartment, I opened the balcony doors wide, letting in the spring breeze. Branwen had left a note saying she'd gone job hunting. Cale had texted to confirm our dinner plans with his brother, who was visiting from out of town and had reached out wanting to understand what had happened. My phone buzzed with an email notification, my attorney confirming our meeting for next week to discuss the final terms of the financial separation from family accounts. Another buzz, my therapist checking if I wanted to move from weekly to bi-weekly sessions given my progress. A text from a college friend, recently reconnected with, suggesting a weekend hiking trip. I looked around at the life I was building, a life defined not by who needed me or what I could provide to others, but by authentic connections, mutual respect, chosen family. It wasn't perfect. There were still legal matters to resolve, emotional wounds still healing, relationships being cautiously redefined. But as the sunset painted my walls in warm golden light, I recognized this moment for what it was, not an ending, but a beginning. A new chapter characterized not by the absence of conflict, but by the presence of peace. A peace I had fought for, a peace I had earned, a peace I now claimed as my own. You know what's funny about finding your voice after years of silence? It's not like in the movies. There's no dramatic moment where music swells and everything suddenly makes sense. It's more like dawn breaking. So gradual you barely notice until suddenly you look around and realize everything is illuminated. It's been 6 months since that Christmas confrontation. 6 months since I walked away from the familiar patterns of manipulation and gaslighting that had shaped my entire adult life. 6 months of rebuilding, reclaiming, and sometimes just resting. Today, I'm sitting in my favorite coffee shop, laptop open, watching people come and go. The barista knows my order by heart now, something that would have seemed like a small thing before, but now represents consistency, routine, a life that's predictably mine. I'm working on a response to an email from a woman who found me through a support forum for people estranged from manipulative family members. She's where I was a year ago, paralyzed by guilt, drowning in obligation, unable to imagine a way out. "How did you do it?" she wrote. "How did you finally break free without breaking yourself?" It's a question I've been asked countless times since I began sharing my story online, anonymously at first, then with increasing openness as I realized how many others were trapped in the same toxic patterns. The answer isn't simple, isn't linear. But as I type my response, I find myself reflecting on the journey. Not just the dramatic moments, but the quiet, incremental shifts that ultimately created the life I now inhabit. It wasn't one decision, I write. It was thousands of tiny choices to value myself, to question the narrative I'd been given, to set boundaries even when they were met with resistance. And it wasn't about cutting ties for the sake of punishment or revenge. It was about creating enough space to hear my own voice again. I pause, sipping my coffee, considering how to articulate the most important realization. The hardest part wasn't walking away, I continue. It was recognizing that what I'd been calling strength, endlessly absorbing others' chaos, bankrolling their emergencies, managing their emotions, wasn't strength at all. It was conditioning. True strength came in saying no, in disappointing people who had come to see me as an extension of themselves, rather than a person in my own right. As I write, I think about all that's happened in 6 months. Branwen found a job in marketing and recently signed a lease on her own apartment, close enough for regular visits, but separate enough for her to continue building her independence. Cale's divorce from Rosine was finalized last month. He's focusing on his career and healing, not rushing into another relationship. My niece and I have maintained contact through carefully negotiated visits, supervised by my aunt. neutral territory that allows our bond to continue despite the adult complications. The legal separation of finances was completed 3 months ago, a process both liberating and sobering as the full extent of Rosine's financial manipulation became clear. My mother continues to alternate between angry accusations and tearful pleas for reconciliation, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the patterns that led us here. I maintain minimal, carefully boundaried contact, not out of ongoing anger, but as protection for my hard-won peace. Most surprisingly, several extended family members have begun their own journeys of disentanglement from the dysfunction. Cousin Beth recently called to tell me she'd started therapy after recognizing familiar patterns in her relationship with her mother. Uncle Jim has established strict financial boundaries with Rosine after discovering she'd been manipulating his wife into lending her money. Even Aunt Jess, once Rosine's staunchest defender, has grown suspiciously quiet in family discussions after finding discrepancies in her own financial records. The ripples continue to spread, not because I set out to create them, but because truth has its own momentum once released into the world.